Halito, and welcome to Native Chalk Talk, a podcast by natives for all. Here we're keeping our Native ancestors' stories and history alive, while also sharing with you our Native culture, traditions, and more. I'm Rachel Youngman, a Choctaw originally from Anadarko, Oklahoma. I hope you'll enjoy this journey with me as we learn from our Native American guests. And I hope you'll do me a favor. Feel free to like and share these episodes. I so appreciate it. Yakuki.
Me and my dad, we opened up my grandpa's box of scrap silver. Eventually we found this piece of silver that had a eagle feather already drawn out and Sharpie on it. We would file it, grind it down, shape it, polish it to how we needed to. It took 3 generations, my grandpa to draw it out, my dad telling me how to work on it. Because of what my grandpa and my dad passed down to me, I feel more connected to them.
See and share our stories at togetherwe'remore.com.
You're listening to part 2 of this series.
Again, talking today about your story because part of what you do, I assume, has to do with some of the healing that you've gone through a bit. So let's talk about that. You once told me that your very first memory was having to do with living in a foster home. So I want to get to that in a moment. But first, why don't you share about your story, starting with your birth parents and their stories and why you were placed in foster care?
So our reservation, Bois Forte, is just south of uh, the Canadian border, and and both of my parents are from there, um, and it's a small reservation. There's not much work, logging. Um, there's mining, but the mines never hired native people. Anyhow, so
Really? May I stop you
yeah,
there for a moment? Do you know why they don't hire Native people?
well, the same reason they didn't hire women. And so if you remember, like the sexual harassment, the federal law, that originated because of the way women were treated in the mines.
Are you
Uh,
serious?
yeah, in Virginia, Ely, or Virginia and Evelyn. That came about because of the way women were treated. I mean, when you live um, on or near border towns, they're generally much more racist
Okay.
than like in a big city, right? And so anyhow, my dad was an alcoholic, and my mom left him, and I might have been 3. I don't really know for sure, but and what I remember is, um, we were at this house. My mom said they told me to go upstairs, and I went upstairs, and a little bit later I heard the door close, and I went downstairs. My mom was gone. So she went to the local welfare department when she left my dad to get some assistance. And the assistance they gave her was putting all of us in foster care. 4 of them, my older brothers and sisters, stayed on the reservation with a missionary. Her name was Miss Johnson. And then me and my brother, Chuck, and my sister, Margaret, we went to stay with a white foster home, um, probably about 30 miles from the reservation, I'd say.
Okay.
And I was there until I was 6. And and then we went back home. My mom went back to my dad. They reconciled, um and yeah, we went home like on, I think it was Christmas Eve when I was 6 years old. So, in those days, this would have been like 1954. Um, and so, that was that era of can't remember what they call it, snatch. They would
Right.
snatch the Indian kids. And that's what happened. the welfare could do anything they wanted to. They were very powerful. And what they told my mom was at that time is if we ever have to, if you ever come here again, um, it basically, if she left my dad again, they would adopt us out across the United States, which is what they did. You know, I have cousins that happened to. So she never left him again until I was like 15 years old. But um, yeah, and that happened to so many native kids. I mean, we talk a lot about the boarding schools, um, but for those of us who were in foster care, it was every bit as traumatic,
Oh my
every
God.
bit as in those 3 years, if my parents came to see us, they would say, "Don't get in the car with them." And they did not invite them into the house. So it was, don't get in their car. My parents would sit in their car and, see us for a few minutes and then they would leave. And when we knew we were going home, my foster dad, he would say to me, "You and I are going to go to Mexico, and no one will ever find us because you will look like all the other little kids in Mexico." I mean, you know how terrifying that is. But I remember that quite clearly,
Mm.
and feeling really, really afraid at that time.
That
So
would be
anyhow, they talk about ACEs, right? Um, Adverse childhood experiences. Well, I probably had, many of them. And so by the time I was I remember, during ricing, Menomen is sacred food to us, and everyone who had left the reservation would come home during the wild rice harvest,
Mm.
and harvest wild rice, and because there was so few jobs, harvesting wild rice was not only food on your table, but it also sometimes determine whether you were going to have a car that year, um,
Wow.
clothes for your children to go to school. It was a cash crop, right?
Hmm.
And so everyone would go home. Well, so I remember being like, 13 years old, and all the teenagers were partying, and somebody handed me a beer and I took a sip, and then I just pretended to drink it. I didn't like the taste. Well, then when I
Yeah.
was 14, I actually drank, so go back to the reserve every fall, right? So I
Hmm.
go there when I was 14, and then I drank the whole can, and I kind of liked it. I was a shy
Yeah.
kid, and I felt like I was so funny, and
And you're fitting
yeah,
in.
yeah. And so when I was about 15, I left home. I went to live with an older sister out in Washington, and then I came home that year, and um, and I was working at a restaurant on the weekends to help my mom. And I also worked after school, but I worked like the bar rush, and I go back and work all day Saturday, the bar rush again on Friday and Saturday night, and then the Sunday. So I was a lot of hours. But I met some older Native women there, Dakota women, and they didn't their mom was an alcoholic. My mom was a saint. My mom didn't drink, smoke, anything. But
Oh,
and their
really?
right, but their mom had arthritis. I mean, like, I would say, like, why do you give her such a hard time? And she's in pain all the time. But anyhow, but they hated the drinking. And so I was introduced to marijuana, or weed. And I remember my mom finding it under, I had a little box under my mattress,
Oh.
and came home one night from the restaurant. My mom said, "What is, no, get rid of that weed." And I said, "That's not weed, Mom, that's tea." And she's
Oh,
like, "Get rid of it before your little sisters find it."
she knew at least that much, that it
Yeah, yeah,
was really weed.
she knew. So anyhow, but that seemed like a better better than alcohol. Um, like people didn't get crazy and, fight and stuff like that. And then because I was working so many hours and, then my friend started doing, back in those days, it was called speed. And so I was introduced to that. And then I think when I was 18, I met the man I was married to, who just came back from Germany, and he was an alcoholic, and so then there was introduced to alcohol again. So
Okay,
I would
great.
need like all those three things.
We'll be back after this quick break. Y'all, I have to show you my new favorite soap from Baker's Bar Soapery. Check out this Yunish, which means buffalo in Choctaw. It's scented with leather fragrance, so I bought one for my husband and one for me too, of course, and it smells so good. This soap is a tribute to the Choctaw and the resilience of the buffalo. Luxury soaps, lotions, and lip balms from Baker's Bar Soapery are 100% Choctaw crafted. And yes, these are made with goat's milk, so they leave your skin feeling soft and supple. So load up on these Choctaw soaps made by Tiffany at Baker's Bar Soapery at thebbsoapery.com. But be sure to get 20% off when you use the code NATIVECHOCTAW, that's all caps, when you spend $25 or more. Treat yourself to the luxury your skin deserves with Baker's Bar Soapery.
But I worked, I always worked. And then I had a car accident. So the ex-husband went to treatment and said something to me like, I think you have a problem too. Well, I was 21. And I said, my only problem is you. And and so we separated. And I remember it was like on a New Year's Eve, uh, my car wasn't even running. Somebody was trying to give me a push, and they pushed me, and I hit another car. And it was New Year's Eve, so we just left it. And
Mm,
then to sort of get out of trouble, the ex-husband had gone to treatment, so this seems like a good thing to me. I'll go too. And I
yeah.
did stay sober for a couple of years. And then my father was, it doesn't matter if your dad's an alcoholic. It does, he was also so many other things. He was a
Mm,
gifted musician. He was so smart, like my dad was like the smartest man I've known. He would go and talk to when things were going to happen that he'd read about that were going to negatively affect Native people. He'd put his suit on, walk to town and talk to, Judge Miles Lord or, whoever. On the Reds, when the tribal council would see my dad walk into the meeting, they'd go, "Oh no," because he was going to give them heck, about something. What was happening?
That's why you're an activist today too,
Yeah.
probably.
And so, my dad was an alcoholic, but I still loved him. And anyhow, he was killed. And when we buried him, then I drank for the 6 months uh, after that, until then my mom said, you need to stop. And I had two small kids then. She said, or I'm gonna take the girls. And well, I
Wow.
thought she was bluffing, but then when a counselor called me at 4 that afternoon and said, have you made up your mind what you're gonna do? Like I decided
Wow.
I better
She
go to
wasn't messing around,
no,
your
no,
mom.
no, no. And thank God. And so I was 23 at that time. So
You were so young to
I
have
didn't have
kids
a
at that point.
yeah, I didn't have very long you know, drinking career or using career. It was pretty
Sure.
short. Um uh but I do know that had I not stopped, I certainly would not be here today. I mean, I'm small, 5 feet, maybe I'm 4'11", I don't know. I'm 5 feet. I was and probably about 100 pounds back in those days.
Mhm.
But um, I'd go into a bar and, take a pool stick to somebody who looked at me wrong. I was crazy. And,
I know it's not funny, but you were forced to be reckoned with even at 4'11" or 5 foot.
driving home, I could hear like sound, and somebody had shot I know I would not be alive today had I not stopped using. And
Yeah,
really,
yeah.
it's just, you get up every morning and it's a new day, and
Mm,
you can make whatever you want to of that day.
that's right.
But every day when the sun rises, it's a new opportunity to do something, whatever you choose to do that day.
I love that so much. Inspirational for all of us. And I think sometimes when people are telling their story of sobriety, or when you're hearing it, you're thinking, oh, they must have been hooked on hard drugs for 50 years or whatever it is. But it's not always that. There are all these different variations of the journeys and different journeys people were on. And for yourself, you can't touch that because it is an addiction. And of course, obviously, it's an addiction that plagues our Native American people. So it's great that you learned early on, but I have to give kudos to your mom too. I mean, you had to decide for yourself, but your mom was tough love. She was going to take those kids. Do you think you were closer to your mom or your dad?
I think for many years I was probably like I had certainly more conversations with my dad. It wasn't until I got to be an adult, and in some of the research I've done, I worked for the state of Minnesota in the chemical dependency program division for 10 years. And some of the research that I've done with other Native women is, uh, it doesn't matter, uh, if our mother left us with our grandmother or an auntie, or if we're in a foster home, that sense of abandonment
Mhm.
is really weighs on us, I think. And
Yeah.
in the research we did, we interviewed 100 women who had at least a year of sobriety. One of the things they said was that um, that abandonment
Wow.
really really hurt them. The other thing we found in that research was that in homes where the language is spoken in the home, and now it doesn't matter whether that the children spoke the language or not, but if they were exposed to the language, if they were exposed to cultural activities, their their and in the time between when they began drinking or using drugs and when they quit was shorter. It was
No
shorter.
way.
And it was also statistically significant that they had fewer suicide attempts. Um, and um, and yeah, so I think, like those are things that, in terms of prevention, we need to really pay attention to, like, the resurgence and learning the language, I think is really, really important. The cultural activities, that is prevention.
Yeah, because people want to feel like they're part of something. And if you go to a powwow, you see, let's say, the elders, the young people, everyone in between dancing out there. And you'll see a little tyke get out there that's like 3 years old, and he'll dance like a grown up would dance. And it's because it's all he has seen, and he feels accepted, and it's okay for him to dance, and it's okay for him to fail out there. And I think that that speaks volumes to what a true tribe is. And a tribe can be your own people. It can be the Ojibwe. It could also be multiple people outside of the tribe as well in some cases. But as long as you're loved and accepted and you're given a forum to be together in community, that's my own personal take on things. I tell my sisters all the time, like if I go to my niece's basketball game or something, those are the things that make her feel like she's part of a tribe. So you can do that in multiple ways.
Yes,
It doesn't have to be in a
yes.
powwow. You mentioned that you grew up on the Bois Forte Reservation in Minnesota. Why don't you share with us about what the reservation is like there? You mentioned it's small, and I noticed that too when I was looking it up. What else can you share about the reservation?
Well, uh, so my parents, when I was born, we lived at a place called Sugar Bush, which is um, on Pelican Lake, about 20 miles from like the village, right?
Okay.
And there were a number of people who lived there, uh, and um, and so we lived up on top of the hill, and the house that my grandfather had built. And it's one of the best fishing lakes in the state.
Oh, I
And
bet.
then at Net Lake, which is at the village, um, the best wild rice in the world grows there. And so we all know about wild rice. We grow up with it. And there was an island out on the lake at Net Lake. Me and my cousins, we would go out there during the daytime, canoe out there, and we'd play on that island, Spirit Island. But as soon as we could see like the sun was starting to go down, we'd jump back in the canoes and head back. But I spent a lot of time as a kid on that lake, and different places on the lake, and me and my cousin Chan, we'd go duck hunting, and we were like 12.
Oh
I
my
didn't shoot
gosh, yeah,
the ducks,
out there
but
with
he
your
would shoot
guns.
them, and we had, yeah, and nobody thought anything about it, right? Because
Yeah.
I didn't know we were different. I never learned to swim, and my dad had built me and my brother a raft. We lived at Sand Lake, and we would go fishing every night, all from the time the ice broke on the water until was cold in the fall. But so we'd catch a bunch of sunnies and bring them home, and my mom would fry them up the next morning. I also had a snare line, me and my brother. Um, so the snare would catch rabbits. And so before we went to catch the bus, we were like, this is 7, 8 years old.
Right.
We'd go check the snare line, right?
Right.
And if there were rabbits, we'd bring it home. If I heard, a rabbit still making that little pitched squeaky noise they do,
Oh.
I would turn and run back home, and come back later. But we grew up on with rabbits and rabbit stew, that commodity food they give you that
Yeah.
cornmeal.
Cheese and the
But
all
they
that.
make that cornmeal like my mom would make it like a breakfast. Oh, I hated that. But if she put it in that rabbit soup, it was the most delicious thing. It was a totally
Oh,
different
I
texture.
bet, right?
It was so good. So we had, deer meat, fish, rabbits, and I would say if it wasn't for rabbit waboos, I wouldn't be here today because
Wow.
it was such a staple. I remember once my dad came home with like 12 chickens, and he was gonna, you know, um, grow chickens. And and a year went by, and there was none of the eggs hatched, and we just, eat them. And finally my mom looked at him, she said, if you want to have um eggs that hatch, you have to have a rooster.
Rooster,
And we
yep.
did not have a rooster. So
It's like,
so
why isn't this working?
he was, he would try all these different things. But I
That's
know
so
life is pretty
cute.
simple. Most of the time we didn't have electricity or running water, so we'd always go across to the well to get our water, or go to an artesian well.
Oh,
And those were the life was really simple. Um, you know, when I was 12, my dad was gone again. And so I'd get off the bus, and my brother Mike was 3 years younger than me. So I was 12, so he was like 9. We'd come in the house and change clothes, and my mom would have something warm for us. Like she was the best baker. She might have like homemade biscuits,
Oh,
and then
sounds
we'd
so
have a
good.
biscuit, and then we'd go out in the woods and we'd cut down a tree and haul it home and cut it up and then chop it up and then we go haul water. And that was life, that was every day all winter long. And I remember we lived at this one place and we did that. And in the springtime, this white guy comes to the door and he tells my mom, like, you can't cut my trees anymore. What? Like,
Oh,
who can
oops,
own the trees?
oops, oopsie daisy.
Right?
What?
Like, what? Because we go across the road because where we lived, it was just like pasture, um,
Yeah. Oh my
on a farm.
gosh.
So there were no trees there, so we'd have to cross over the little county road and go in the woods and
You
and
just
I'd
had to
find
go get trees. You
a
didn't care what it
poplar
was.
and haul it home and like you can't cut my trees anymore. Like what? There's anyhow.
Oh my gosh, it's so
I
cute.
mean
That's
that there's just such different attitudes, like
yes,
values and
yes.
this is mine and I think like the the worst addiction is greed
Mm-hmm. For sure. It's an addiction. I didn't think about that.
because
Huh.
why would the billionaires keep needing more and more and more and more? It's
Yeah.
addiction. We have a teaching about that in our lodge that we come into the world and there's a path laid out before us, but we can go this way or we can go that way, or and if we're lucky, we can come back, to that
Mm-hmm.
red road,
Mm-hmm.
But if you go too far with any, could be jealousy, could be greed, could be addiction, could be, addictions come in many forms. If you go too far, like you might not find your way back. And of course that's what happens. But I feel like, that's um, a pretty good take on where we are today. And when the first time I left and to carry the water from Gulfport, Mississippi, that was 42 days. And I had my laptop with me, so I checked emails and things like
Mm-hmm.
that. And the board had to take care of like the um paying and the accountant would get all the things ready and payroll
Yeah.
and the board chair would have to sign it. Well, I thought and everyone thought like, how are they going to function without me? Well, you know what? They function just
They
fine.
did.
Stay tuned for part 3 of this series.
Thanks for listening to Native Chalk Talk. Be sure to join our community on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, and check us out at nativechalktalk.com. Stay tuned for the next episode. You're going to love it. Yakoki. Thank you, my friends.